USA. And that's how we pronounce it in the United States. It originated in Portugal, so it would be pronounced Rocha in Portuguese. I know this because my son-in-law was one of the founders of Rocha, Brazil. And so pronounces it correctly when I kind of butcher it. Brittany and Dr. Robert Sluka had an article in Perspectives on Christian Science Faith that we've referred you guys to on plastics in the ocean. And that will be her topic tonight. I hope that she'll also talk to us a little bit about Arasha. And Brittany has her undergraduate and master's degree from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. So up there with lots of wonderful, good humans who are passionate about God's good creation. And so I'm old enough that, you know, it was people like Dr. Cal DeWitt that I, from the same university, that I first learned of speaking in the creation care space. And it's such a joy to see folks like Brittany following in those footsteps. So Brittany, you're also on the board of EEN, I think, and I'll just let you give your bigger picture.
Sure. Thanks, Angela. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I was actually able, while I was still an undergrad, to attend one of Cal DeWitt's famous coffee office hours before he was, you know, completely sort of off campus. He still visits occasionally, but actually didn't get the creation care bug from Cal DeWitt, but from, well, originally God, but was really, that was fanned into flame by Reverend Ed Brown, who happened to be working with Cal DeWitt on something completely non-environmental, and he became convinced that creation care is a gospel issue. So I will start a screen share to just guide us through some great photos and slides and that sort of thing, and continue telling you a little bit about myself. So of course, thank you for being here. It is 8 p.m. where I am in Wisconsin, and I do dearly love the Rocky Mountain area. We were chatting beforehand, and I've visited my aunt and uncle out there a couple of times, and it just feels like driving away from the mountains, watching them in my rearview mirror is like heartbreaking. They're so just present. But here is Dr. Robert Sluka and I. We call him Bob. He goes by Bob. But you'll find him on like ResearchGate under Dr. Robert Sluka. So I like to introduce him this way first. So you've heard a little bit about my education. And after I graduated from college, I worked with Ed Brown at Care of Creation, not in any sort of like scientific role, but just in a project specialist role. So I did basically whatever Ed asked me to do. I felt led to get involved in the Christian side of environmental education and advocacy, trying to work with churches, particularly evangelicals, to get them to talk more about and practice creation care. I was working at Care of Creation for about 4 years and was able to do a lot of traveling for the creation care and the gospel consultations around the world as part of the Lausanne Creation Care Network, which now the World Evangelical Alliance is part of that as well. So it's like a big, long Lausanne/WEA Creation Care Network title. And through those travels, was able to encounter all sorts of people working in relief and development, and just see the great need there was for scientists, ecologists in particular, people who shared the faith but also knew how to practically do ecosystem restoration, wildlife ecology, and that sort of thing. So I went back for a master's in environmental conservation from UW-Madison, and was able actually to serve a mission organization in Peru through my project. It was a non-thesis track, so I'm not an academic. You'll probably get that feeling from my presentation. And I lived in Peru for 4 months, in the more or less in the rainforest, and conducted a rapid ecological assessment on, it was about 144 hectares of land that the mission organization had kind of come to caretake. So that was really, really formational for me. And then once I finished my master's, I started consulting other mission organizations on how they could implement creation care projects. So that took me to Haiti frequently. And then I took a position with RMASA USA as a conservation ecologist. And I lived in Florida for a while to work with the conservation program. I'll share a little bit more about RMASA in the next slide. But the marine conservation program focuses on microplastics research, including nurdles, which are pre-production plastic pellets. And we also do a lot of collaborative biodiversity research and conservation. So looking at horseshoe crabs, surveying them during their breeding season, and that sort of thing. We were also hoping to get into more spiritual wellness, connection to God's creation through kayak tours. But then the pandemic hit and things kind of got shut down. So that wasn't to be. And then I was able to continue working with the Marine Conservation Program remotely. So I moved from Florida back to Wisconsin, so that I could get married and be with Matt, my husband. So it's a happy ending, and I'll be traveling back to Florida next month. So best of both worlds in some ways. So to tell you a little bit more about RMASA, it's a Christian biodiversity conservation organization. We're part of a global family of 20 countries practicing faith and place-based conservation. We have a number of national programs. So marine conservation is one of them. Another is Climate Stewards. This is new, and I am the new project coordinator for this program. Climate Stewards is an offsetting and carbon calculator project. So organizations, individuals, churches can use the carbon calculator or use our consultancy services to find out their carbon footprint. And then there's the opportunity to offset, which the funds from those offsets go to our projects located in 6 different countries. So we work directly on the ground, mostly with other RMASA organizations. So Climate Stewards is different from some other carbon offsetting organizations in that there is no middleman. We're not just selling carbon credits. We actually are purchasing them directly from projects. Another is Love Your Place. So Angela was part of our book club last summer. We read Norman Wiersbe's Living the Sabbath. Love Your Place is our monthly donor program, which includes online community and a number of different courses on things like plastics, climate change, and habitat right now. And so we continue to add courses over time and provide opportunities like a webinar that we hosted with Catherine Hayhoe last fall. We also have Wild Wonder, which is a vacation Bible school type theological environmental education resource for kids. And then we also have 4 community-based conservation projects. So of course, Florida, but also Texas, Nashville, and Southern California. So if you know anybody in those areas, you could always connect them with me and I can help them connect with local staff if they're interested in finding out what RMASA is doing in those areas. And just to do a quick infomercial, I mentioned I'll be in Florida in May, and it is for this amazing opportunity. Bob and I are hosting an RMASA Adventures trip. So it's a focus on research and exploration. This is an opportunity to get conservation focused experience and focus on creation care. It's specifically, this one is for college students and recent grads. So if you know anybody who might be interested in this, definitely let them know, pass their name to me. The deadline is May 1st to apply. And of course, everybody wants to know we're taking this seriously. So we've got COVID-19 protocols, and if you have any questions about those, you could always email florida@rmasa.org. We will be finishing up our microplastics in beach sand research during this time, and it's going to be wonderful. So if you know anybody, please let me know or let them know. Would love to have them join me in Florida. Okay, infomercial over. So the plastics in the food chain paper, we kind of wanted to bust some myths with it. And one of them is that people tend to think of plastic pollution as a marine problem. Most research has been done in this sphere on plastic, so it kind of makes sense, right? And plastic pollution is a huge marine problem. However, for those of us that don't live on the coast, like pretty much all of us, the ocean and the marine environment can feel really far away and can make this problem seem sort of distant. Like plastic pollution doesn't really involve us or affect us or impact us. Obviously, this isn't true. We're connected in many ways to the ocean, whether it's through global climate regulation, the oxygen produced by algae, or of course, seafood. We're all connected to the ocean. So while most research on plastic pollution and particularly microplastics has been done in a marine setting, it's an issue that matters to us all. So I'd like you to raise your hand or use your little emoji setting to let me know and let us all know if one of these statements applies to you. So I've got a number of statements here, and just raise your hand or use your little emoji. Raise your hand if you have ever been to a beach. Yeah. Raise your hand if you've ever eaten seafood, including seaweed. How about if you enjoy bird watching? Yeah. How about if you eat food that someone else has raised or grown? And how about if you think it's important that world hunger be ended? Yeah, so for all of these reasons, plastic pollution matters to us.
And I've been popping things in the chat
You really-
off and on, Brittany.
Oh, yeah.
One was the RMASA USA link, but also a recent paper about plastics in the air in the Rocky Mountains. So.
Yeah. We wrote this paper, like it's been like a year. So I don't have all of the references right up in my head, but I'm pretty sure one of our sources was microplastics in the air in the Alps, so mountainous regions. You'd think, why? They're there. Yeah, thank you for putting those links in there. And if anybody else has links, I will try to put some links in there towards the end as well. we really had three goals for writing this paper, and I'll cover them briefly and then we'll do a little bit of a deeper dive and work through them. So the first was to raise awareness. Petrochemical companies have created vast amounts of plastics in the last 70 years, much of it unrecycled. Plastics are in the food chain, and more than that, microplastics, nanoplastics, they're in the water we drink, the air we breathe, the soils that we cultivate. Should we panic? No. Should we be concerned? Yes. Not just for ourselves, but for who and what we care about, whether it's smallholder farmers in Haiti, sea turtles, coral reefs, or the next generation that will inherit plastic pollution from us. And from all of the years of plastic production, because it doesn't biodegrade. We really strove to answer this question within the paper, so to help us just understand the issue better. So we talk a lot about microplastics, and the typical measurement for those are 5 millimeters in size or smaller. Everything else bigger is a macroplastic. And though plastic doesn't biodegrade, it can be degraded in sunlight, UV exposure, mechanical fragmentation from wind and water and wave action. So although it's always plastic, it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And those are what we call secondary microplastics. And there's lots of different categories, like fragments, fibers, films. We call those things just generally items. A lot of plastic products are created to be really small, like microbeads that aren't supposed to be in face wash anymore, toothpaste, and then industrial scrubbers. Those are all primary microplastics because they're created to be that small. This includes those nurdles that I mentioned earlier, the plastic resin pellets. Those are a primary microplastic. A lot of the land-based plastic pollution that ends up in the oceans gets there because of global waste trade inefficiencies. So for decades, countries like the US, Canada, members of the EU, and Japan were exporting a lot of the plastic waste to lower income countries in East Asia and the Pacific. And as you may know, China stopped taking those deliveries. And so some countries like Malaysia have been sort of taking the overflow, but then also rejecting and sending back plastic waste because they don't have the facilities to handle it. So plastic gets mishandled, ends up in the environment, ends up in the ocean. A major source of microfiber pollution comes from the washing of plastic-based textiles like fleece, which can shed 1,500, 2,000 fibers per garment per wash. When it comes to sea-based plastic pollution sources, we're really looking at a lot of commercial and recreational fishing, even research vessels, and of course, shipping. We all watched, what was it, Evergreen, the big, gigantic ship stuck in the Suez Canal. There are so many shipping like that going around the globe all the time, and shipping containers can fall off and thus emptying all of their contents into the ocean. And in the UK, the fishing industry is the main source of all marine debris beyond even just plastic. But most fishing gear nowadays is made with plastic. Has anybody seen Seaspiracy?
I was just
Nope,
gonna
I-
post
I
that
read
in
a
the
little.
chat.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't gotten to see it yet.
I read about it and what's good and what's overstated about it, I think.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting watch, but they really do, they highlight the fishing industry in particular, and the fishing gear that is left to continue ghost fishing. Yeah, some of their claims about the makeup of plastic in the ocean, how much is from fishing and how much is from like land-based sources, is maybe a little suspect, but whenever, since I just watched it recently, whenever I'm talking about like industrial fishing, that's kind of what pops into my mind. So that's a little bit about where plastic pollution comes from, but then where does it go? And the short answer is everywhere. Like we say in the paper, it is ubiquitous. It's found in Rocky Mountain air. It's found in Antarctic sea sediment. It's found in Arctic ice. And plastics end up in a lot of like freshwater and marine environments, particularly microplastics, by passing through wastewater treatment plants, or they're swept up in stormwater runoff and then through industry effluent as well. The wastewater treatment plant is a really interesting case because so much, think about the microfibers being shed from everybody's clothes, being washed all over in every household. Most of those, up to 99% of those microfibers, are actually caught at the wastewater treatment plant in the sludge. But then that sludge is applied to agricultural fields often. It's common and more economical than incinerating it or dumping it at sea or sending it to the landfill. So then you're taking all of those microfibers and putting them into the soil. Interestingly, soil microplastic contamination isn't really that well studied. I think it's an area of growing research. And of course, microplastics, and we're talking really, really small, like dust particles, disperse into the air. Of course, a lot more is found indoors, which makes sense. There's a lot more plastic inside than outside, and particularly the concentration. But even microplastics are measurable in outdoor air, particularly in rain events. And so this is how plastic enters our food web and into the water that we drink, the food we eat, and the air that we breathe. Oh, and in this photo, we are hunting for nurdles because like I mentioned, those big container ships, the container goes over. There's been plenty of cases of nurdles, the pre-production plastic pellets, getting lost at sea and then washing up onto beaches all over the world.
How big is a nurdle, Brittany?
It's about the size of a lentil. They come in, there's slight variations in size and thickness. Some of them look like pencil erasers, like the little pink top of a pencil, very cylindrical. And some of them really are like lentils, kind of flattened, but bulgy in the middle. But then over time, they do kind of degrade. They get to look a little rough, get a little bumpy, but the new ones are very smooth. They come in a variety of colors, but most of the ones that we've found in Florida are white or sort of a yellowish color. Portugal has found a lot of blue ones, interestingly. So another goal of the paper is to generate conversation, which I'm so glad that that's actually happening. It's fantastic. Really, the last third of our paper opens up some theological reflections. How can we think theologically about the roots of plastic pollution and the harm done to our food chain? Should we hope for better in the future? What role can Christ followers play in a world broken by sin, particularly as it pertains to plastic pollution, and indeed just creation care and justice issues more broadly? I think my slides are out of. I don't remember putting that there. Let me just see quick. Well, okay. I'm just going to jump around a little bit. I rearranged my slides slightly before this meeting, and apparently I didn't get it quite right. So continuing with the theological conversation starters. How is this one? We're filling and subduing the earth with plastic. In our paper, we do use strong language because we have what we call a plastic addiction. So just to pull a couple of those punchy quotes, we wrote, unfortunately, the properties that make plastics a marvel also make it a window into the crooked heart of sinful mankind, revealing the idolatry of convenience, cheapness of both price and thrill, and self-centeredness. Another one is, plastic waste is outside the biological, biodegradable systems of creation and is a symptom of a spiritual illness that causes us to seek comfort and convenience more than God's kingdom. So a few of the theological reflections that we raise include our care and concern for future generations. With billions of tons of plastic waste requiring more and more land, to landfill, how will we, for example, have enough food for everybody? The 9 to 11 billion people projected to be citizens of planet Earth. What about the rest of creation's ability to survive and even thrive? God ultimately feeds all of us, but we are interfering by generating plastic pollution. And not only that, we're unjustly harming the poor, those that are out of sight, out of mind, and the marginalized. How are we to be agents of reconciliation when we continue to literally dump trash in the backyards of our neighbors? What of restoration and healing for creation? Ultimately, we know that Jesus will usher in a new creation, and we long for that day. But our work towards God's ultimate purposes for all the cosmos need not wait. We can engage now. Our goal is not to make any individual feel guilty. Your contributions of plastic waste are not single-handedly killing whales and sea turtles. I feel like that's important to say, particularly with these, with the things that we wrote. If you read it like we're writing it directly to you, it can feel like using plastic in any scenario is a sin, and that's not true. It's our way of life and the system as a whole that is unsustainable, and so we need system change. And that's going to make a much bigger difference than our individual actions alone. So for example, having an opt-in instead of an opt-out of plastic straws at a restaurant. So instead of everyone automatically receiving a straw, and you have to remember to decline it before the server puts it down on the table for you. If instead the server asked if anybody needed a straw, then you're opting in, and those who need a straw or would like one can take one. So that's a very small example of a system change that can work. All right, we're going to jump around a bit because now I understand what I did. Okay, let's. Yeah, let's go back here. This is actually a picture of fish tacos that I made last month. Homemade tortillas and everything from fish that my parents caught down in Florida and brought back to Wisconsin and shared with me. So sustainable even. Eating plastic sounds yucky, but we all do it. We drink it, whether it's from the tap or bottled water. But is plastic in my fish tacos? If I'm eating fillets, I think this was a sheep head. There's probably no plastic in it. Plastics don't tend to be able to transfer into the muscles via the digestive system. So for many species, the size of the plastic ingested matters most when it comes to how it affects that individual or if it kills them. Small items will typically pass through the digestive system, but larger items, plastic bags, whales eating like large chunks of plastic, those can get caught in the digestive tract, resulting in slow starvation or complications due to their whole digestive system being blocked. Conversely, extremely small microplastics or even nanoplastics can get caught in body parts of different animals and species, like fins or gills, even plants actually. And then with nanoplastics, there's the possibility that they can pass through the intestinal wall into the bloodstream. So ingesting plastics is a hot topic. It makes it easy to start a conversation about plastic pollution with virtually anyone. And talking about plastic is really important. Even if we aren't eating microplastics in our fish tacos, plastic contamination is impinging on our ability to restore habitats and ecosystems, which are the basis of our food web. I wrote in my notes, yikes. It's a big yikes. So as you read in our paper, there's all sorts of pollutants and chemicals that are attracted to or attach onto, adsorb onto microplastics in particular, whether it's flame retardants or polychlorinated biphenyls, all of these nasty things that attach to and just travel along with microplastics in the environment. And these can be chemicals that are added to plastic at as part of the manufacturing process, which then disperse into the environment and then are picked up by other plastics, or it can be, these pollutants find their way into water systems particularly, and then are attracted to plastics. But it doesn't look good. There aren't that many studies that we found, and again, this was a year ago. Probably could have done some homework to see if there's anything really new. But in terms of the complex real world scenarios of these types of chemicals and pollutants transferring from one trophic level to the next. So from like a brine shrimp up to a zebrafish. Not many studies like that in the real world. We did cite 2 that showed that it's possible. And in one case, it was harmful to the top consumer. And then to just take a step back. So even if it's, it's possible that even if we're not eating a fish fillet that has physical chunks of plastic in it, there still could be harmful chemicals present in some way, shape, or form. So it does seem like there's some risk. But we need more research. Okay, did this one. Okay. The third goal of the plastics in the food chain to help spur action. Are there any Lord of the Rings fans in the group? I saw one hand. Just Timothy? Okay, a few more.
Yeah, no, all of us, because it's awesome.
Okay, well, people, so I'm 31, but like the younger generations, I think, have totally missed the boat. The Lord of the Rings movies were made in the like very early 2000s. So in any case, I am rereading the Lord of the Rings and rewatching the movies because my husband has never seen them. So the elves, amazing, powerful beings. Everybody loves them. But they are, many of them are choosing to leave Middle Earth because their time is up. They feel like they can't do anything about the changes that are happening, and they want to preserve their lives in the Grey Havens, rather than stay and fight the evil running rampant through their beloved lands. But some do choose to stay. And that moment in the Two Towers movie, where all of the people from Rohan have fled to Helm's Deep, and they're getting totally pummeled by the Uruk-hai. And then all of a sudden there are the elves from Lorien, and everybody cheers because they have come to do what they can, even though it doesn't look good. So there is no Grey Havens for us to escape to. There's no planet B. We have the choice to do something about plastic pollution and answer the call of a good creation that is suffering. There is hope found in our faith that restoration is possible. So I want to give you some action points, and taking action can look a lot of different ways. One of the best resources that I can provide for you is from RMASA. It is our new and improved plastics toolbox. I just linked it in the chat. So this is a great resource for anybody who wants to act on plastic pollution, or even wants to do some fairly basic research with a school group or a church or anything like that. If you wanted to do nurdle hunting, which is one of the activities that many RMASA countries around the world do, particularly those that have a coastline. Instructions are in the plastics toolbox for doing nurdle hunts. There's lots of other resources as well, media, theology. It's chock full of some great things. And I'm pretty sure that there's even a short video of me, like a 2-minute video talking about this paper that's accessible to folks who wouldn't typically pick up, a scientific journal. Another action step that I've already mentioned is talking about it. So if you're familiar at all with Katharine Hayhoe and the climate action sort of movement, she states that talking about climate change is the most important thing that you can do. And that actually transfers to a lot of different issues that we face today. We can simply talk about plastic pollution and why we care about it personally. And through that sharing, we can help other people realize that taking action, addressing plastic pollution is something that fits within their value system and actually helps them to be more the person that they want to be. Thankfully, plastic pollution is not politicized like at all. I mean, maybe at some level it is, but nothing like some of the other issues like climate change. So I feel like it's a good first step to take, and it should be fairly safe. I know people across the entire political spectrum who are very interested in plastic pollution and want to do something about it. Another important thing that you can do is a cleanup. So this is a picture of me doing a cleanup in Madison, Wisconsin, with some friends of mine from church. And even though in Seaspiracy, the main dude kind of gives up beach cleanups because he doesn't feel like they're effective, it is actually, you're physically removing pollution from the environment and putting it someplace more secure. So it is a positive thing for, that it's hyper local, sure. But it's still an important act, and it gives witness to anybody else who's around. Every single time I would pick up trash on a beach in Florida, there'd be people enjoying the beach who would come up and say, thank you for what you're doing. The more of us that are taking these small actions and people are seeing it, the more socially acceptable it becomes, and the more normal it becomes that we just take care of the places that we like. So I will not poo-poo beach cleanups or highway cleanups, or parking lot cleanups. Even though they're small actions, it still does make a difference, and it can have a ripple effect. Another action you can take is to help your favorite business or even your church to switch their plastic practices. This could look like a lot of different things. It could be through incentives. So, local coffee shops will give you a discount if you bring in a reusable mug rather than you essentially purchasing one of their disposables. It could be a bag tax. So if you want a plastic bag, you pay 10 cents or 5 cents more for that plastic bag. It could be swapping biodegradable takeout containers for polystyrene, or incorporating bulk shopping items. There's lots of different ways that could look, but the key is really, I guess, finding out what are the needs of your favorite local business, or what are the needs of your church? What are the reasons that they're making certain decisions when it comes to plastic? And speaking of church, another thing that you can do is to encourage your pastor or preacher to incorporate creation care topics in sermons. Plastic pollution, again, not really political. So I feel like it's a fairly safe issue. Maybe a little bit easier to get your pastor on board to talk about it. But to start bringing these two realms together of what we do outside of church, these sort of mundane, recycling or, packaging, these things that just are kind of part of the background of our lives, bringing that into a spiritual focus, because we recognize that our actions matter. Another thing that you can do is keep up to date with research on bioplastics and other biodegradable plastics. This is an area of huge interest. You can already go to the grocery store and purchase bioplastics, but we really need to know a little bit more about them before we can say, like, yes, this is a great thing to switch to. Because some studies have shown that they don't really actually biodegrade unless it's very specific circumstances, and we just don't really know if they're much better. But there's a lot of hope for other bio-based plastics, whether made out of mushrooms or whatnot, not to mention research into microorganisms that can actually digest and break down plastic. So that would be something to do, is to just keep up on what the current research is in that arena, because there's a ton of plastic waste. And it'd be fantastic if we could figure out something to do with that doesn't create a new problem. And then the last action step that you can take is to raise your voice and use your vote to create change at the legislative level. So you've got a couple of things that works in your area, and I looked briefly at them, not super in depth, but very interesting to see some of the movement in terms of creating or incentivizing markets for recycled goods. That would be a huge help. And I don't remember what the other one is now, but if you want to talk about it, we can do it.
I just stuck those in the chat. 2 of them have passed. One established a fee-based waste diversion grant program. Another incentivized developing recycling end markets. And the one that's pending right now is management of plastic products. And so there's some links in the chat for that now.
Okay. And I'm gonna copy and paste all of the action steps that I just mentioned. I'll just paste those into the chat. Although it looks like some of you were taking notes. Mm. There.
And I'll add to that a report on the state of recycling and composting in Colorado that came out just last year.
Nice. That concludes my slides and presentation. I would love to connect with you if you like. You can email me. My email is brittany.mikulski@arasha.org, right there on your slide. And yeah, I guess you guys probably have some conversation if anybody has any questions.
Angela, how do you want to do that? Should we just raise our hands or shout loudly?
And Lynn,
Yeah,
your hand has been raised the whole time.
Yeah, Terry's got his hand up, so go, Terry.
So, couple questions, and I'm just trying to see what you think about this. It's probably 2 or 3 years ago, I went up with my family to Rocky Mountain National Park, and amazingly, at all of the major pullouts, where you stopped and looked over a scenic site, the walkways were all made from this recycled plastic composite material, instead of out of wood, or a concrete path, or even a dirt path. And and I know just in my conversations with my classes about plastics and recycling and so on, that's kind of an end of life use, right? It's the only thing you can do about it. Make boards out of it that you make decks out of, and park benches and and walkways. So I just wondered what you think about that end use. I mean, it seems to me that putting plastics out like that probably contribute to more plastic in the environment, as that material is exposed to weathering and different things like that. And then the second question is just, you sort of hinted that there was a proper use of plastic, and I'm wondering if you could talk about what you think is legitimate use. I mean, it seems to me that maybe all plastic ends up in the environment in some form, depending on how we treat the waste, or the product after it's used. And anyway, just a couple ways to pick your brain there.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Those are great. I mean, you're right. There is no away, right? Even if everything is in a landfill, that's still here on planet Earth, and we can do our best to seal it off. Never, no swamp monsters come crawling out of the landfill, but it's still here with us. So yeah, proper use of plastic. I'll go in reverse order. I recently, 2 weeks ago now, got my first COVID jab, and I'm fairly certain that there was some plastic associated with that, for everybody. So keeping items sterile is one of, I would say, a decent use of plastic. Things that can't be or shouldn't be reused because it could pose, biohazard danger. That's one good use of plastic. There's a lot of scenarios where plastic has, there's trade-offs. So shipping is a lot lighter if you're transporting plastic bottles than if you are glass bottles. Lighter trucks use less fuel, equals fewer fossil fuels burned. I kind of have the question, like, do we even need like soda in the first place? Is that maybe soda is just an absolute evil? But I would never say that for sure. Although I don't really see much good in it. There's a lot of uses of plastic that are completely sad. But there are some cases where it does help us be healthier. So the medical field, and safer. So sports equipment, and that sort of thing. That's what I was thinking in my head. And I think, we briefly touched on it in the paper, like there's some reasons that plastic has become so popular, and some of it is because it's really good at certain things. As to your first question, the plastic boards, it's essentially delaying the inevitable. I mean, everything around us eventually will end up in a landfill. So if we can get another use out of, I've seen the billboards, it's like a plastic bottle and it says, "I want to be a park bench." It gives you sort of the warm fuzzies, or at least that's what they want you to think. But it's really just delaying the inevitable because everything ends up in a landfill, or it biodegrades. So I don't know. Is it better than just sending it straight to the landfill? Perhaps. It might be geographically relevant, depending on if there's abundant timber and lumber. Would we be destroying like spotted owl habitat to create a boardwalk when we could use plastic bottles? There's just like a lot of factors that could potentially make that a really complicated question. So I don't know. I would say generally, the more uses you can get out of plastic, the better. But if there's a biodegradable alternative that is also less harmful, that would be the way to go.
Seems like it's important to keep asking the questions, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So Brittany, Annabelle here. I just want to comment that through this pandemic, I've just observed so many of those good habits of taking your reusable coffee cup into a coffee shop just flew out the window for a while because they wouldn't refill it for you.
Yes.
The bags for a while, at least my experience was, first you couldn't even take your own bags, and then as long as you bagged it yourself, it was okay. So, and all the takeout containers, if you can't eat in the restaurant on a real plate, so you take a styrofoam takeout container. It was just so painful, but it speaks to the trade-offs that you're mentioning. But I think we'll have to retrain ourselves a little bit as we pull out of this.
Yeah, totally. I was not happy to not be able to take my reusable bags to the grocery store. But this is a good example of the system change that we desperately need, because we will probably always want to have takeout, or some way to transport food from a restaurant to our homes. What material could that be? It wouldn't have to be plastic. How can we change the system? And it was maybe a technological question, for these like bioplastics and that sort of thing. Maybe in the future we'll have an alternative that is actually, quickly and truly biodegradable. I think that that's probably a lot easier than trying to get people to implement individual behavior change. If you go on any of the major like plastic organization websites, they suggest like you can take your own containers to a restaurant and have them fill it. Maybe not in COVID era, but I know that that's hard for me. It puts the responsibility on the individual to make the change when a lot of the change needs to happen further upstream. Like recycling. We don't have anything in the paper about recycling, but it's kind of a big sham created by certain companies to put the responsibility on the individual consumer rather than taking responsibility at the company level to do something about all of those plastic bottles.
That's why that
Thank you
pending
again.
legislation is important. And one of the things that I think has gotten taken out of it is much to do with takeout containers that just proved to be too big a leap. So the last I heard, that wasn't in it. I'm sorry, Annabelle, you go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you so much. I need to drop off to go get kids in bed, but I really appreciated your article as well. So thank you so much for joining us, Brittany.
Thanks, Annabelle. Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Lynn, you've had your hand up for a while.
Oh,
You're muted, Lynn.
I got
There you
it.
go.
I'm muted. He yelled at me from the bedroom. You're muted, Mom. Love it. Okie dokie. I should say hello to someone who came in a little late. Let me butcher your name. Similolua?
That's very good. Thank you. You did
Was
really
that
great.
close?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, really close. Thank you. Nice to be a part
Welcome.
of. Thank you so much.
Welcome. I have a question for you, Brittany, but I'd like to ask, are you in the Rocky Mountain area or are you joining us from somewhere else?
Myself?
You. Important
Oh,
person
okay.
there.
Yes. I'm a student at Colorado School of Mines. So
Oh, Colorado School of Mines. Oh, good.
Okay,
Well,
and how do you
glad
say
you're
your
here.
how do you say your name?
Similolua.
Oh,
Nah.
that's so cool.
Similolua.
Yeah, but Simi is just okay. It's just okay to say Simi.
Yeah,
Man,
that's,
my name's Tim.
Oh, nice
So-
to meet you too. Thank you.
it's so
Such a-
easy, right?
Such an easy, simple name. Yours is beautiful. Okay, what was your question, Mom?
Oh, so my question was, Brittany, do you have any idea if there's any progress towards some sort of certification process for biodegradable claims on plastics? Has the industry gotten that far, or is it too much in its infancy?
I just straight up do not know.
Do you know if is there any good way to search on the internet to find an answer to that? Just kind of Google bio-based plastics and biodegradable plastics.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good place to start. You have to watch, there's plenty of industry reports. I remember reading somewhat recently a report on bioplastics out of the UK, but that's a different context than here. So maybe use a geographical marker as well and throw USA on there and see what you get.
Yeah. In another question, in this business of once a plastic, always a plastic, kind of discouraging recycling, I've thought about that. And yet we emphasize recycling a lot in our household. And if we did not do that, and we've got the 1, 2, and 5 bucket, and we've got the stretchy plastic film bucket, and then everything else goes in Tim's eco-bricking project. And if we didn't do that, I think we'd be a lot less thoughtful about plastic. It would be like giving up. And when we pay attention to it several times a day to wash and dry the plastic and put it into the right place and so on and so forth, at least it's in the forefront of our minds, to
I,
make
to-
some
I
changes.
totally agree. I do totally agree. It's probably not fair to say recycling is 100% a sham. Like, of course, particularly those high value plastics, often do get recycled. But it can be discouraging, when you realize like there's so many people that are recycling improperly, and that just ruins the whole batch. And so much that is recyclable, unfortunately, ends up in the landfill. But we still have to be acting according to our values. Like, that's really important, right? That we are embodying what we believe and paying attention to and using fewer plastics, and then doing our best to steward those plastics that we do use, I think is a great practice. It can be an outworking of discipleship, if you want to think about it that way. Getting creative about ways to upcycle. I've been using some like yogurt containers to make plant markers from my seedlings. There's just lots of, I don't do Pinterest because it's dangerous for me, but you can find all sorts of interesting things to do with different materials. But yeah, I appreciate that comment.
Alan, you had your hand up.
Yeah, and you've probably, just in the past couple of questions, 90% answered the question I was going to ask, but I'll sort of ask it anyway, which was with regard to plastic recycling. I've also read recently that, even though we have all these plastics with number 1, 2, whatever the numbers are, that putting them in the recycle bin is maybe a little bit better than putting them in the trash can, but not by very much. So I'll maybe reframe my question. Is there some part of plastic recycling that is pretty worthwhile that we should focus on, and maybe other parts that it's a total sham and you should try to completely avoid buying this number of plastic, whether it's a recycle bin or not?
Yeah, I would say generally it's best if you can avoid polystyrene. So that's like your styrofoams. Those are really difficult to recycle. I don't think many municipalities even accept them. So those numbers, that 1 through 7, that says nothing about whether it is a recyclable item or not. And I think that you guys all know that. It simply indicates what major type of plastic that it is. I think like generally the 1s and the 2s are the most easily recyclable. Like my parents, that's all that they can recycle are number 1 and number 2. So, potentially just trying to match your consumer habits with what your local municipality accepts. And then of course, making sure to clean them thoroughly so that they are ready to be recycled.
And you can sometimes Google around for hard to recycle items, and sometimes you'll see some advertisements from groups you may be involved with that are taking hard to recycle items and things like that. Polystyrene, bad stuff, but there's the golden real estate for those of you who are anywhere near Golden. If you by chance end up with something that has those giant styrofoam blocks of things. I ordered a piece of furniture recently, and I half filled my car with this styrofoam, but Golden Real Estate recycles it. So you can look for those kinds of things, not to make a commercial, but I'm grateful for that we have people in our communities that are providing services like that. So that's another place to look. And then talk to your friends. I remember when I was just out of grad school, and so this will date me. I really we really weren't recycling much. So we're going back to the late 80s here, right? And I just observed a friend of mine recycling, and I went, oh, I need to do that. And that began me on a recycling journey. And then as we watch our friends do other things, friends that I've influenced now influence me. Good friend of mine in North Carolina sent me a shampoo bar the other day. I thought, well, I'll try this. Yay, it worked. So now, I'm one less piece of plastic. So that's a testimony to Brittany's talk about it. Yeah.
Your hair looks
Terry,
great, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Terry, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so just a comment about hard to recycle. I think there's a place in Michigan that recycles styrofoam, that you can just send them bags of styrofoam that you've collected. I mean, there aren't very many places in the country that do that. But that's again one solution if you're going to use styrofoam in that form. What about, so here a question then, what about incineration?
Mm-hmm.
And but incineration combined with proper carbon capture and emissions reduction technologies. I mean, I'm very interested in the whole carbon capture business, just from chemist perspective and maybe even as a solution. But here, to put it in a landfill, you're not doing, you're not getting rid of it really. To incinerate it, you can convert it to carbon dioxide. And of course, we don't want that in the atmosphere, but we can collect it and actually get rid of plastic. It's not forever if it's turned into carbon dioxide and captured. What do you think of that?
I honestly don't know too much about it. I mean, I know the sort of general, like, when we were growing up and had a bonfire, is like, make sure you don't put any plastic in the campfire because of the toxic fumes. That's obviously different from an incinerator sort of scenario where it's a tightly controlled system. But that's one of the I would think probably top questions would be, what about all of those long, hard to pronounce chemicals that are added? There is no one type of plastic. There's no 1,000 types of plastic. There's literally millions of kinds of plastic because of all of the different combinations of additives. So if an incinerator could deal with that in an environmentally safe way, that would be important, critical even.
I mean, one of the things that happens to hazardous waste, and just from our research enterprise at Colorado State, the hazardous waste company, does what it can to say distill hexane and reuse it, and different kinds of solvents like that. But at some point they get to the point where you can't do anything with it, and they seem to prefer incineration with proper emissions controls as a way to deal with the waste rather than dump it somewhere, right? Or store it in cans somewhere.
Yeah.
Sounds like a direction to encourage your chemistry students in, Terry.
Yeah, I would say no solution is off the table, just because it's burning, that's bad. Yeah, I'd be interested to learn more about that. That's how a lot of people around the world deal with their waste, is they burn it.
They don't usually burn it safely. But.
No. Like where I was living in Peru, like every once in a while, they would just go create a pile of, now there's a scenario where people have very little agency to choose anything besides plastic in terms of the different options that they have. You know, we're in the middle of the rainforest. We're 15 hours from the nearest hospital. Like, there's a pile of their trash. They just burn it every once in a while, you know, to get rid of it. But there's literally, I mean, there's just trash literally everywhere because there's no management system in place to deal with it. So yeah, it's a big problem. It just physically takes up so much space. So yeah, I'll have to learn some more.
I mean, that's what we used to do in Indiana, in rural Indiana, when I was growing up. You know, 55-gallon drum trash can, you fill it up,
Right.
burn it. And or take stuff to the dump. And then every once in a while you set the dump on fire to reduce the volume.
Totally. I saw something in part of a documentary, and that's all I can tell you because it was a while ago and I don't remember. But an attempt at technology to essentially incinerate plastic, but create a fossil fuel, return it to a fossil fuel.
Yeah, right. That's one thing you could do with the CO2 that's emitted from the incineration of the hydrocarbons in the plastic.
Sure. Right. And so then that's not creating any new emissions.
Mm-hmm.
It's carbon neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
Okay, I think I wanted to say something. Can I go ahead?
Yes,
just
please.
in case my accent is a bit weird, I think I can also type my question. But thank you so much, Brittany, for the presentation. I know you mentioned microplastics and the fact that humans can inhale it, right? So I don't know if you've done like some study, because you know most of us right now are putting on masks everywhere we go, and I don't know if those have some, you know, microplastics, just like you mentioned. What effect do you think it will have on our lungs? Because I'm so concerned, you know, because those critical organs in our body that we really cannot see, that are far away from our touch, you know, they're very vital. And the effect of whatever we do now, you know, is always just start up for something in future. Because, you know, sometime last year, my dad passed with mesothelioma, a kind of lung cancer.
Mm.
So, so I'm pretty concerned. Do you think wearing masks right now is good for us? You know, given that we have some microplastics in whatever we, you know, we wear, like the cloth mask or even the surgical mask.
Mm.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. And I'm sorry for the loss of your father. It's hard. I would say I'm not concerned, mostly because we're already breathing microplastics, like microfibers, at a high rate anyway. You know, often our clothing is made of it, and we're indoors. You know, air's not getting circulated. You know, it's not like we're 24/7 in an airplane where the air is circulated and renewed every 2 or 3 minutes. You know, indoor air pollution is a real thing, and it's actually, it is a health hazard. But generally speaking, I'm not, you know, I'm a medical professional. I don't think that, well, I don't know. Maybe there's people studying. There's probably studies about microplastics respired through masks or because of masks. But generally, I think it's probably not increasing the load much, you know, compared to what we're already breathing. So yeah, I think it's definitely worth researching, I think, but probably not increasing harm or anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
At least I hope not. Although mostly I wear cloth masks.
Yeah, it's something to think about, isn't it? I mean, same here. I wear cloth masks, but there are, you know, times I'll put a microplastic filter in it and things like that. And for folks who are having to wear them a great deal of time, you can understand why they would ask that question. And the same is true of our clothing. I mean, I've been wearing base layers that are synthetic for years, and I'm starting to think, I got to find some other things. The thought of synthetic fibers against our bodies all day long probably is not a good one. Things we haven't even thought about. We're not going to make all these changes overnight, and there may be bigger systemic changes we need to think about first and foremost, but lots of good questions to ask. So other folks with questions.
Let me add one comment. It seems to me that the best long range solution is technology, in the sense of changing from petroleum-based plastics to bio-based plastics, because you just cannot argue against the convenience and the sterilization. One of the things I do every week is I volunteer with an organization that collects and then donates medical supplies. And I have sure seen so much plastic packaging and all of this, but they need to do it because these are sterile packs and they are one use, like you were saying earlier, Brittany. And the only way I can think of that that's going to change from polluting the whole world is if it becomes a biodegradable plastic, because they still need the characteristics of plastic. And that in medical communities, I can't imagine the substitute for plastics. So seems that's something we should be encouraging at the legislative level, is R&D into, more R&D into biodegradable plastics. So I went on Wikipedia while we were talking, and there's quite a bit of, starting information for those of us who don't know much about biodegradable plastics. I'll go start there, branch out, see what I can learn.
Good thoughts from our chemists, Lynn and Terry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Others, thoughts or questions? Brittany, I really want to thank you for pointing out how discussion of plastics can really be a gateway drug for people to bring them into creation care. And, I've struggled with, because climate change is such the topic, and it's our pervasive problem, that, as you say, it can be met with, that conversation can be met with opposition from people who feel it's been politicized. And I really appreciate how your paper provides such good theological reflection. I like the point. We think plastic pollution prevents us from properly loving God and our neighbors. And that's true of all these other concerns as well. I mean, climate change, biodiversity loss, air pollution, and so forth. But I think Brittany's really done us a service to help us understand that talking about plastics can be an entryway for folks to think about creation care, where particularly for folks who are having just kind of knee-jerk reactions to other environmental conversations like climate change. So I think that was really important. And then I would just commend to all of us the good theological reflections in this paper as a basis when we're trying to, for example, convince our pastors to include creation care in their sermons and things like this. This is a really good reference and a short piece. So thanks, Brittany, for that. Really helpful. Terry's got his hand up.
Yeah. So are you familiar with the diaper wars? Everybody here, cloth diapers versus paper or plastic, disposable diapers. That was one of the earliest life cycle analysis type studies. And then the very first one, at least as I understand it, was Coca-Cola trying to think about containers, right? Plastic, glass, or steel cans, or now aluminum cans. And so, this is part of our discussion at church even. What's the trade-off in is there any trade-off to having to wash things? is there a downside to, what rewashing your cups after church instead of using disposable cups? Just comparing, not just the cost, that's part of what companies are interested in, but in terms of the creation care aspects of it, what is that comparison being done when we think about, now, admittedly, plastics in the ocean and how plastics in the air, that's a different level of problem in a sense, but using soap, using cleaners, using hot water, those all have energy and material costs as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's also the fellowship aspect of doing dishes together.
Right.
I grew up in a small rural Wisconsin United Methodist Church where a lot of the social events were lived out through the kitchen in the basement. Turkey suppers, Mother's Day breakfasts, Father's Day breakfasts, all these sorts of things. And I just had the most fun helping cook food and then doing those dishes with a big group of other volunteers. And, just like felt like I belonged to the church, belonged to that community because of that involvement. So there's all sorts of interesting things going on there. I hardly believed it when I learned that dishwashers are more economical with water than hand washing. I was like, no way. But the research is in, especially if it's a somewhat newer dishwasher, it uses a lot less water. That being said, what are the trade-offs? Comparing using your dishwasher to disposable. I know which one I would prefer, but there's probably other considerations, perhaps problems of scale. The church that I went to in Madison was big and it probably takes several loads to do everybody's coffee mug. But then, the small United Methodist Church where we had like 120 people total, wasn't a big deal.
And those are the kind of analyses we have to do. I think Catherine Hayhoe would remind us that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a power of love and a sound mind, right? And so people like Terry encouraging his students to do this, to embark on this kind of research. And then all of us, as we make those trade-offs, doing some research to figure out which is the best way to go, at least for now. And things change, It used to be that buying, my shampoo in plastic bottles I could recycle was the best choice. Now I can buy a shampoo bar, just that example again. But we can, it's all about small steps, but then also looking at the systemic changes that we can encourage as well. Anybody else with questions or comments?
All right, Angela, let me jump in here for a minute. Brittany, thank you so much. And it's also late at your place there. So thank you. Yeah, send you off to bed with our gratitude.
Yes,
Angela also is the organizer for our May event for the Rocky Mountain ASA. Would you like to introduce that at the moment, Angela?
Yeah, we're gonna. So we were encouraged in ASA to do some of our chapter meetings as they related to things in the perspectives